When we introduced the concept of repetition, remember that we said there are two main ways in which we will use repetition in programming. One is when we want to perform an action, exactly the same action, over a large amount of data, a set of data. An example of this was the previous program we wrote, the odd or even. We want to perform a check on every single integer that the user would input, but it was exactly the same action that we wanted to do in every of those integers. The second way that we mentioned was when we want to actually accumulate some kind of value over a set of data. And this problem that we're going to solve now is going to be an example of this second way to use repetition. What we want to do is to write a program that will read a sequence of integers from standard input, similarly to what we had at the odd or even example. But this time we want to compute the sum of these numbers. We also want to count the number of values that we read. So how many numbers did the user provide, and what is the sum of the values? There are two problems at least that we need to solve. One is, and we have seen this problem in an earlier example again, how do we know when we are done, when the user doesn't give us anything else? The second problem is, how do we actually accumulate the sum? How do we perform the job that we want? Give it a try and then continue with the video to see our suggestion. We have started writing our program, which so far what you see are things we have seen before. What are those? We want to read from standard input. We want to read the numbers that the user will give us. Therefore, we are using scanner, and also we are using a variable n, which will be getting the integer that the user will give us through nextInt. Now, the reason that you may notice that n is in gray in IntelliJ is because this n we're not using anywhere. You will see the note that says variable n is never used. Right? Rightly so, we're going to use it in a little bit. The way that we are making sure we read from input while the user gives us input is through the hasNextInt method, which again we have seen before in the odd or even example that we were talking about. So what do we want to do as soon as we have in our hands the integer that the user has given us? We want to get that value and add it to the value we had before. So we want to be accumulating, we want to be creating the sum. So I'm going to declare and initialize a variable, a sum variable, and add that value of n to the sum. Another way, if you remember to write that, would be to say sum plus equal n. It is exactly equivalent. This is one thing we want to do. The other thing we want to do is to also count how many integers the user has given us. So we will have another variable, say count, which we will start it from value again 0, and every time we receive one more integer, we will be increasing the value of count. I have added a print line to our code. It happens to be through printf, which says that the sum of these many values is that many, using the count and the sum variable. Compiled the program, and now we're ready to run it. I have also hit run. And the program waits for our input, so let's provide some input. It waits for integers. Various numbers and lengths and whatever we want. Let me give some numbers that are negative too. Now the hasNextInt, as we have said, would end in two ways, either by finding the end of file character, which is Control Z for Windows and Control D for Unix, or if we provide something that is not an integer, like this. So it says the sum of 6 values is that many, and if it was difficult to make sure that our program is correct with these values, I'm sure you count them, it will be correct. Let's rerun the code with something that is a little bit easier. and provide a non-integer so that we actually see that the value is indeed correct.